The aim of this presentation is to discuss in brief what are the approaches taken by the teachings of Buddha and social science in understanding human behavior. This may be of interest to practitioners who are curious to know what are the differences of the teachings of Buddha as opposed to social science approaches. To begin, if we were to discuss social science approaches, so social science is the branch of science devoted to the study of societies and individuals. The social sciences study issues in a systematic and scientific way. Science, a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. The scientific method relies on systematic, repeatable testing of expectations against the observed world. And these methods include laboratory experiments, field surveys, case research, ethnographic research, action research, and so forth. There are levels of subject knowledge. So when we talk about social sciences, there are levels of subject knowledge. So for instance, an individual might just Google something to understand a quick view of a certain topic of social science subject matter. And someone might have knowledge of that subject matter up to the GCSE O levels, A levels, up to undergraduate level, master's level, or PhD level. So in any subject, there are various levels of knowledge that one could possess regarding that particular subject matter. And if we were to talk about social science, social science has various specialized sciences or disciplines within it. So if you were to pick just two subject areas that comes under social sciences, so psychology is one of them. Psychology is a scientific study of the mind and behavior. Sociology is the study of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. Both psychology and sociology, in terms of testing phenomena based on empirical or measurable evidence. And these empirical phenomena usually comes from the participants. And participants, where the data comes for the scientists in these areas, comes from individual participants who are human beings in most cases. So one of the interesting things to note here is that in all science, within social science areas, in all scientific findings, all findings are subject to change. When a new research comes in, it might challenge the findings of the previous study, and so on. So if you were to question why is it that the findings emerging from social science in general tend to change, often that could be explained based on the fact that these data that comes for science comes from individual participants who are subject to change. In other words, individual participants' mind is subject to change, and that's what the Buddha's teachings are saying. And so as matter. So when the data of scientific nature comes from a source that is subject to change, the findings are subject to change. So that could be a very plausible way to explain this matter. So just like in any other subject area, with regard to the teachings of Buddha, there are levels of knowledge or level of understanding. And there are 4 levels of understanding, and they are Sri Mentora, once returner, non-returner, Arahant. So the first level of one's understanding of Buddha's teaching is what we call as Sri Mentora. Before attaining to the level of Sri Mentora stage, one would become either a faithful follower of Dhamma or faithful follower of Buddha. That means one who accepts to a reasonable level that Buddha's teachings are meaningful or that Buddha is an acceptable teacher. So these are levels of knowledge, the levels and the teachings of Buddha. So the levels of enlightenment indicate the level of one's understanding of the teachings of Buddha. Once again, if we were to compare the social science approach to the teachings of Buddha, so the social science approach always tests data based on the view that there is a person or an individual. So the person's thinking patterns are tested, the person's behavior is tested. And whereas in the teachings of Buddha, a person in the sense there is no permanent person. It is just the view that an individual possesses that there is a permanent self while they are still at an ordinary stage. However, from the perspective of how the universe functions, to claim that there is a permanent self or permanent being or permanent individual is not possible, because in any being, the thought process is subject to change, so the mind is changing, and so as matter. So the external world is changing, so as internal world. So the one who gains an understanding of these phenomena at the universal level that exists beyond the convention comes to understand, although in general, in terms of convention, it has been said that there is a self, an identification of self. If by exploring further, there is no such phenomena as a permanent self to identify with anything, and this understanding comes based on the teachings of the Buddha, and at the same time, 3 fetters are abandoned, and they are non-self view, clinging to rites and rituals, as well as doubts about Buddha and his teachings. And this is the Sri Maitri stage. Once again, let us move back into a bit of psychology area. One of the concepts that has been commonly spoken even among certain Dhamma practitioners, is a very popular concept, seems to be emotional intelligence. Since Daniel Goleman's book came out in 1995, the concept of emotional intelligence seemed to have been commonly applied in various work settings, even to recruit people who have the highest emotional ability, seems to be the standard. So emotional intelligence, otherwise known as emotional quotient, is the ability to understand, use, and manage one's own emotions in positive ways, to relieve one's own stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. So it has been useful because emotions play a key role in anyone's life. So paying attention to emotions and how to manage things has been useful. So that is from the psychological perspective. And if we were to move one step beyond that, to move into Sri Maitri stage, which means moving from the conventional state of identifying self to understand how the universe functions, to understand the universal truth, to understand identification of self is simply due to ignorance, but in real sense, there is nothing to be identified as a permanent self. one comes to gain noble virtues. So for an ordinary person, almost it is useful to have an emotional intelligence as well as precepts and so on. Whereas when someone make a transition from the state of an ordinary being to the stream-entry state to understand the universal truth which is applicable across the universe, because of one's abandoning non-self view, in other words, that also means a person who maintains the self identity is likely to maintain interest towards self. On the contrary, at the stage of stream entry, when one abandons identifying oneself as oneself, one's self-interest or the point of interest goes shift to others. So that means others' interest becomes the key to that particular individual. So this is a natural process, happens internally in one's mind. External factors are not influential. And due to that, one comes to naturally possess noble virtues and also maintain loving kindness and good qualities. And so the need for precepts or need to consciously maintain emotional intelligence or whatever the other things are useful before becoming stream-entry stage. However, for those practitioners who are interested in training the mind to reach stream-entry, then because the noble virtues come to establish when they gain the right understanding of the universal truth. So the need to maintain consciously emotional intelligence or any other precepts diminishes. As naturally, with the shift, a person's interest, others' interest becomes an individual's interest, and that particular individual who gains stream entry becomes a person of a noble character, good human beings. So this is how you could clarify the difference between social science approach and the teachings of Buddha. This is the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for listening.